You're listening to Hockey Talk on the Rock
All right, stop.
with Laura and Keith.
It's interesting.
So let's back up a second.
He played absolutely out of his mind.
It made no sense to me.
And now, here are your hosts.
Alrighty, well, we are back doing another Hockey Talk on the Rock episode, and I'm Keith, that's Laura. We're here on Salt Spring Island on Friday, April the 30th, and we're going to be doing our usual talking about hockey and Canucks, and this is our 30th episode, so it's our Feel Like We're Getting Old episode. I want to quickly, before I throw to Laura for our initial Canucks update of the week, just point out that I'm wearing a Whalers jersey this week, but it's because of who's on it, and it's Ron Francis jersey. And that's the little piece of news I wanted to start off with today, being the finalized payment for Seattle, and Francis is the GM of the Seattle Kraken, obviously.
Yes.
So they're officially in as the 32nd franchise, and as a West Coaster, I'm very excited and hope that the rivalry they intend to form with the Canucks does do so.
Yes, I agree. I also have that note for this week. And yeah, so basically they made their last payment today, so now they can trade and they can sign players. And I was going to touch on this one a little bit later, but I kind of went into Cap Friendly today and I used their Seattle expansion tool, just looking at the Canucks. And I know there's been some talk, especially recently because of Holtby's hot play, that maybe now he'll get taken by Seattle, as opposed to before where it looked like they had better options. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say the Canucks do not need to overthink this one. They can essentially protect whoever they want to protect, and they're not going to lose anyone big to their team. They're almost guaranteed to lose someone with a contract they don't like. I just say let Seattle pick. If they want to take Holtby, take Holtby. If not, their exposed list is going to be like Roussel and Beagle, and it's so weak. They could protect Ulevi if they wanted to. They can expose him if they want to. He has to play 7 more games to meet that requirement. I think he probably plays it, but that's something to keep in mind. They're in such good shape for this because they're not a deep team, which I'll get to in a second. So do whatever you want, and they're gonna make their pick, and I wouldn't personally throw in any picks for them to pick someone specifically, because I think they can, anyone they choose, it doesn't matter. Anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I guess with Canuck news, this week was not great. But
they played Toronto last, and then they played Ottawa the night before that, and then they played Ottawa 2 times. So 3 times in total since we talked last week.
Yes, and they only had 1 win in those games. And again, it's a hard position to be in because the team looks so tired and just so dead. It's obvious that, COVID had a big effect on this group. And even if not for COVID, I don't think that the players that didn't have it, I don't think they look particularly any better than the players who had it. I think that missing a month at that point in the season was detrimental for everyone, and it really shows. And unfortunately, it's just going to get worse from here because they're playing a crap ton of games in a very short period of time. And if you're already tired, it feels almost merciless for them to have to play all these games, and ultimately I don't think they're going to really mean anything. So it's unfortunate. I don't want to be too harsh on any particular player because, again, I feel like this isn't the greatest time to evaluate necessarily specifics of players, but the positive for me was definitely Cole Lind playing last night. I said to you before the game that I didn't expect him to get many minutes, and I thought that he'd be pretty sheltered, and I was pleasantly surprised because Green played him a lot and he was noticeable. And the first thing I noticed about him was his size. And I think particularly for me right now is that bottom 6 when you have Howrelick and Boyd and VC and Highmore and I think Virtanen even, they all almost look the same. Like their stature is almost identical. And then you throw in Cole Lind all of a sudden and he's something different. And I found that very refreshing just to even look at. And then I also felt like he made some plays that were noticeable in a good way. So for his first NHL game, I thought he looked really good. And I don't want to get my hopes too high on any kind of past the first round Canucks draft pick because they always seem to not work out for the Canucks. But he was basically a first round pick, right? He was like the very top of the second round. So if he pans out to be an everyday NHL player, that would be great. And I really liked his debut. So that was my positive of the week. The negative was like last night, the game against Toronto, the score was 4-1 at the end. It should have been way worse. That actually makes the Canucks look better than what they were. There in that first period, I think they gave the puck to Matthews like in the slot like 4 or 5 times, and he ended up missing. And then Holtby made a couple good saves, but like Toronto looked like they were playing an AHL team to me. And I guess my final point, and again, I'm trying not to be too negative, but Elias Pettersson to this team means so much. And I feel like I even took it for granted a bit. But when you remove him from the lineup, and this year wasn't great for him, like I think he'd be the first person to admit that, he just changes the whole outlook of that team in the sense that, your matchups are so much different when he's in the lineup than everyone else. And the way he can create offense, this team needs it so badly. And, they're going to end up with a pretty high draft pick here. There's a decent chance that they finish actually below Ottawa, I think, in the standings now. So, if you get a top pick, it might not be the end of the world for this team. I know it's kind of a shitty year. We've said this a few times to get a top pick, but if Jim has proven anything, and I know there's all sorts of stuff about how much he's actually had, involvement he's had in the drafting, but he does have a good track record with drafting. So why not give it one more shot?
Yeah, I'll follow on your line of don't want to pick on any one player too much. And I was very broad in my notes that I've got for the Canucks this week, but kind of goes back to before they played Ottawa for that 4-game set. And it was like, I think we were talking about if they could get 6 or 8 points, this is huge. And then to go 1-3 in that series at that time, like it showed how, fatigued they were. And they're lacking, the finish, and overall, their bottom half of the roster, just the lacking of the skill was very noticeable. Their special teams were sloppy, but I mean, that all kind of goes with the fatigue, right?
Yeah.
They were giving up so many shorthanded chances against Toronto. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And you say that they could finish lower than Ottawa, and as of today in the standings, they are lower than Ottawa. I mean, they've got 6 games at hand on them, and they're only 1 point back, but it is possible. And it was kind of surprising to see that when they said going into the season they weren't worried about the offense in Vancouver, it was the defense that was more of a question.
Yeah.
Again, I understand Vancouver has less games played than everyone else, but they have the 3rd worst goals for in the league, only behind Anaheim and Detroit.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not harping on the whole team too hard. It's more of a hopping on board with what you're saying with how critical PD is to the offense, because with him in the lineup for the full year, you're thinking they're not going to be in the bottom 3, if that's for sure, right?
And kind of, I have 2 points to kind of jump on with you right there. So I had a thought, it's kind of a radical thought about the Canucks power play. And it's to do with Tyler Myers. But he's been really jumping up in the play. I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. Again, I don't think he's been particularly bad lately. But he's below the hash marks a lot for being a defenseman. And that got me thinking, would it be worth it to try just plopping him in front of the net on the power play? Because, he's so big. And I know that Boston did this with Chara, years ago. And it's kind of like the Brent Burns thing in San Jose or Minnesota. But I think it would be worth a shot only because the power play is so bad right now that it would be interesting. And I mean, it doesn't have to be on that first unit. I know that Bo Horvat kind of has that bumper position locked up, but on the second power play unit, I wouldn't mind them trying it, see how it goes.
I would only question, do you think he would have the hands in tight?
I don't even know if he needs to. It would literally just be for like taking the goalie's eyes away, right? I don't think he has the hands in tight, although I think offensively he's a better defenseman than we give him credit for. And it's because his defensive game is not strong for his size. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I was just thinking about it and I thought, why not? Give it a shot.
Yeah, okay.
But I doubt they do. And then my second point, kind of going in a different direction, is like, if this was a regular year and the Canucks were playing in their regular division, they'd probably be a playoff team, which is ridiculous, but it's true. And so I really do think that next year they're gonna make the playoffs based solely off the division that they play in. And I kind of wonder this a bit about Calgary too, because the obvious excuse for management and everyone is like, oh, it was a pandemic year and we were playing in this tougher division than we were expected. We didn't make the playoffs. It's okay. But I think what we're seeing right now is very bare bones that this team is not very good. And like, I guess thinking forward to next year, I think there's going to be a lot of people that are like, oh, the Canucks bounce back. They bounce back big time. But if they keep really doing the same thing, I don't think they have any better of a team. They're just taking advantage of a weaker opponent, basically.
Right.
So.
The only other thing for the Canucks before I was ready to move on was moving on to like the defensive side of defensemen. I know I've mentioned that I like Hamonic. He's one of the better looking defensive players on the team for sure. And I just wanted to say, what do you think? Do you think he would take a 2x3, or would $3 million be too much for the Canucks to be able to afford? Or what do you think would be an affordable?
I think it depends on Edler, partially. Because if the Canucks keep Edler, he's obviously taking a pay cut. But I don't know how much of a pay cut. And with Hamonic, again, like we've mentioned, because he seems only willing to play for like one of three teams, I think that the other team is Winnipeg, and that's who I thought he would go to this year. Mind you, their cap situation isn't much better than Vancouver's. So he's kind of putting himself in a pickle where he almost would have to take whatever he can get. And I think it's up to him if he likes Vancouver or not. I don't really know, right? Like, I haven't heard that much from Hamonic this year. I have no idea how he fits with that group. But I would kind of be surprised if he leaves, to be honest, just because it seems to work. And yeah, like I really like his game. I think Travis Green likes his game. If Green's around next year, which I guess is the other talk, because there's some rumors that the Canucks had offered Green an extension, and then some people are saying that it's not true. It's like smoke and mirrors by management trying to kind of put themselves in front of the whole situation. I have no idea, but that check from Seattle today that the Canucks got might help. So yeah, because they have to pay like all the teams, right, with the expansion fee. So maybe something happens with Green in the next little while here, and we'll see kind of how that goes. But I know we've talked about that to death as well. So I do have kind of no, I don't think I have anything else with the Canucks, but some past Canuck news, I guess, is that Ryan Miller announced that he's retiring at the end of this year. And I know we both really appreciated Ryan Miller when he played for the Canucks during a particularly rough patch. I really liked, I was surprised by how much I liked Ryan Miller on the Canucks. So wishing him the best, because I think he was a pretty good goalie, and He played
Yeah,
for
he was a really good goalie. He didn't quite make it to the 400 win mark, but he's up there I think he's in the top 10 wins all time. And he's definitely the most winningest US born goalie of all time. So, yeah, no, I think it was a tough time for the Canucks when he was here, but he was very good when he was here. And he carried, crappy Buffalo teams for a long time too. And always showed up in the Olympics and played quite well. So,
Yeah.
he had a good career, and good for him to call it on his terms, I guess. He got to end it in California where he wanted to be as well.
Yeah, it would have been like interesting to see if he would have agreed to be moved at the deadline, because I think there probably were some teams who would have taken a flyer on him as, a third stringer kind of thing. But he made it pretty clear that he wanted to stay in California, so he did what he wanted. But yeah, good career. Congrats. Always appreciated him when he played here. So yeah, that's my little Ryan Miller talk. And then I guess like outside of the Canucks and the Canadian division, there's a few kind of interesting things that happened this week, I guess. So like the first one is that Winnipeg and Edmonton played a number of times, and Edmonton just dismantled Winnipeg in each game. And it really feels like that series is like 100% locked for the playoffs. And if I was going to bet money right now, I would bet on Edmonton just based off of this play or kind of mastery against Winnipeg, which is surprising on one level. But if you look at, I guess, the kind of potential playoff matchups in the Canadian division, it's almost set in stone, right? You're going to have Montreal and Toronto. I would be absolutely shocked if Toronto blew this. Montreal doesn't look much better than Vancouver right now, in my opinion. They look like a very tired hockey team. And then you have Winnipeg, Edmonton, and again, I just think that's a bad matchup for Winnipeg. So then you would almost have a for sure matchup of McDavid versus Matthews, which you gotta think CBC is like getting super excited about, or Sportsnet, I guess. If they get that, the two kind of biggest stars in the league, right, going head to head versus each other. So we'll see if that comes, but it seems like it's the like destined match in the Canadian division.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got the next thing I was going to move on to is some notes I had on just the general standings, and for the Canadian North Division, I had just the note basically saying that like Montreal's more or less got the fourth, unless they really, really screwed up now. Like Calgary and Vancouver are more or less out of it. Yeah. So it's exciting to be able to see Montreal versus Toronto in a playoff series for the first time in like 40 years or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really cool. I'm excited for that. And then yeah, the intrigue in that other series. I feel like Winnipeg will be able to elevate in the playoffs and make it a little tougher on Edmonton. I'm not sure if Edmonton has the depth in the playoffs either. But
yeah, I don't know. It's fascinating. Like something recently has been really off with Winnipeg. Like they've lost 4 or 5 in a row, and they just don't look very good. And part of that is because they lost Ehlers, right, for the season, I think, for sure. Doesn't help them. And then I also go back to the trade deadline. I just don't think they did enough defensively. Mind you, I kind of think the same thing with Edmonton. So who knows?
They lost Lowry for a few weeks too, didn't they?
That too, which doesn't help. But like the person I think that we probably haven't talked enough about here, who is probably partially because I have a bias against Edmonton, but Connor McDavid is having like an absolutely ridiculous season. It's up to 84 points now in 48 games. I don't think he makes it to 100 points, but he could. I know right now he's like in the last 4 games or something, he's on a point per period basis instead of like point per game. And it'll just be interesting to see how he finishes up. He's got 2 games against Vancouver coming up here, so he could, easily rack up like 6 points in those 2 games, I would say. but we'll see how many he gets. If he makes it to that 100 mark in this shortened season, that would be crazy. So
Yeah, under another thing I had here, I just put McDavid is insane is the only note I wrote, and I was gonna go on from there. But yeah, if he finishes with 100 in the end of the season, he'll have, I think they said, the highest points per game total since Mario Lemieux in 2001.
yeah,
Pretty impressive. It's pretty crazy.
it is. It's just insane. And
Hopping back to the standings real quick, I had a little subcategory of my biggest disappointments and biggest positive surprises, and I want to throw them at you and get like an agree or disagree
sure.
thing out of you, because I didn't really tell you I was doing this. So for the season, but it's pretty close to the end, so you can kind of make certain assumptions for how it's going to go. And for disappointments, I said the biggest disappointment, and I would say this is based on pre-season expectations.
Yep.
For this year would be Philadelphia at number one.
Yep.
I think they were expected to finish pretty high in what was probably the toughest division in the league, and they stumbled wholly as a team, and it was awful. It was a totally disappointing year.
Yeah.
Number two I had was Calgary.
Yeah.
I think they're in a similar boat as Philadelphia in terms of expectations versus the reality of it.
Yeah.
And then the third, I had a kind of a tie between Columbus and Vancouver because I couldn't decide
between the two.
I think Columbus probably was expected to do better than the last place in the division they're in now.
Yeah, it's interesting. Columbus, I find, like, I picked them to make the playoffs, so obviously it's somewhat of a surprise how bad they've been, but I also don't feel like it's totally unpredictable. It's more just the fact that it happened this year and not last year.
Right.
That they took this big step back, but I think if you go through and you look at like Tortorella's run with teams, it always seems to be that he does really well, and then once he loses it with a team, they're just done. Like the Rangers had that, Tampa had that. I'd say Vancouver, he never really got them going, or he got a couple of them going, but not everyone. So the fall off for me with Tortorella specifically isn't like, it's not crazy to think. I think, again, Vancouver, who I did also pick to make the playoffs, there was some sort of expectation they were going to take a step back, and I think it was mainly because of the division they were playing in. And I think, like, you look at what people were kind of tearing Vancouver apart about in the offseason, it was like, you know, they lost Markstrom, they lost Tanev, they lost Toffoli. Well, of those three, I think there's one player there that they could have really used. And the other two, I think they've done a pretty good job of, it took them a while, but I think they've done a good job of like
moving on.
Them.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I agree. No, I thought about it more and more, and same thing as you. I had Columbus as a playoff team in the standings at the beginning of the year, and they're at the bottom. Whereas Vancouver, I didn't have them as a playoff team, so it's not like that big of a. We're just homers, I guess.
Yeah, gotta be a bit anyway.
A couple of things quickly before I go to the surprises. Since the last time you talked about the standings, it seems like the number 4 in the whatever it's called, the West or whatever, is St. Louis's to lose.
Yeah.
Because Arizona's kind of fallen off. It seems like that's almost locked up for them. And I think that they could surprise in round 1. You never know. They're built to be a playoff team.
It to me, St. Louis 100% depends on Bennington. I think they've got a good team. I like their playoffs, like their playoff style hockey team would be how I describe them, kind of like, you know, Boston in 2011, LA in 2012. You think of like a big heavy team that might not necessarily do that well in the regular season, but come playoff time they can, you know, turn it around. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see them probably, I guess it's probably going to be Vegas, but it could still be Colorado finishing first in that division. I wouldn't be surprised to see them beat one of those two teams, but it's got to come down to whatever form Bennington's in.
And then the only big battle, I guess, is in the Central for number 4, between Dallas and Nashville, and they both kind of got hot at the end here. Who, right now, would you pick as the one you think would pull it off?
So I find this hard too because Dallas just can't score goals. But the emergence of Jason Robertson has changed something with that team. I'll say that. And they have the games in hand. I don't know. I somehow I feel like it's gonna be Nashville, but I could see it flip flopping either way. I don't really like either of those teams right now, to be perfectly honest. I think that whoever gets it, they're gonna get knocked out pretty easy. But you see Dallas losing, like they lost like 6-1 or whatever to Detroit last week, and you can't afford. It's like the Canucks, right? You can't afford to lose those games if you're trying to be a playoff team.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the games you lose, and you look back at the end of the season, and you're like, okay, that's why we didn't make it or whatever. So I feel like Nashville will squeak in, but it could be Dallas. Who knows?
My gut tells me Nashville, but it's tough. It's a tough one. I think a lot of players on both those teams are underachieving, the bigger name players.
Yes, and I mean Nashville's doing it right now without Philippe Forsberg too, right? Which is impressive because he's probably their best offensive player.
Mm-hmm. And my only note on the East was that Boston looks scary since Hall's been on that second line.
Yeah, Boston looks good, and the Islanders suddenly do not. I wouldn't be surprised to see those two teams flip-flop in the standings. And my wish for that division is that we get one more matchup of Pittsburgh-Washington, because I just think it would be fun to see it one more time in the second round. But if Boston is playing, well, I guess Boston kind of has to play one of those two teams. But I don't like the matchup with either team with Boston, especially playoff Boston.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, Taylor Hall is fitting really nice there, which I think is kind of expected too. Like we all kind of knew he was going to go there and he was going to be a different player because he didn't have to be in the spotlight kind of thing. So anyway.
I want to see, in a perfect world for me, I would want to see Boston, Washington first round so you can get the Chara versus Boston matchup, and then hope that Washington prevails because, screw Boston. And have Washington versus Pittsburgh in the second round, like you say.
Yeah, I think that would be fun. But if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. I think that kind of my last matchup talking point is that in the last division, which I always mess up, the Central, there we go. Whoever plays in that 2-3 slot, whether it's Tampa, Carolina, Tampa, Florida, or Florida, Carolina, that's going to be the best series of this first round. It's going to be
think so?
Yeah. And I think there's this whole history going back a number of years, basically since Pittsburgh won again in 2017 of the Stanley Cup champion losing in the first round. And if Tampa winds up in that 2-3 slot, I kind of feel like they get knocked out just based on history. But I don't know. I also we can keep going to your surprises because I think it's gonna come out there.
Okay. So my 3, this will be quick.
Yeah.
The positive surprises on the year, I think, based on maybe not the people's expectation, but maybe my expectations at the beginning of the year. Number 1, Florida, as you just talked about. They've already clinched and they're looking good. And I thought they were going to be a team that started hot and cooled off, and they just never really did. The second one was Minnesota. It was hard to say where they were going to finish. I think I had them coming in at 4th in that one, but they played above and beyond what I thought. And the third one for surprises, I thought would be Pittsburgh, because I had them out of the playoffs to start, and they've had a phenomenal year.
Yeah, I agree with all 3 of those. I mean, just really quickly, Florida is a team that I think for the past 2 or 3 years, I was like, yeah, I could see them making the playoffs. And then they always seem to just have some sort of problem. One year it was that they couldn't score. The next was that they couldn't keep the puck out of the net. And then going into this year, I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm tired of picking Florida as being the surprise team they're not gonna make it, and then they come out like and have this really, really strong season. And like again, I know it's early, but Sam Bennett, since moving from Calgary, looks really good with Florida now all of a sudden. And I mean, I kind of think it's pretty funny. I still don't think he keeps it up, but he scored the game winner again last night, and he just looks like a totally different player. And I haven't watched a ton of Florida games this year. I've like seen a bit here and there, but they look like a pretty fast team, and they look pretty deep. So those are all good things going into the playoffs, but I still have that little voice in my head that's like, they're going to make it, but they won't win a playoff round, which is what the point I was going to just say. If it's Tampa, Florida, I think I still pick Tampa over Florida in the first round, but I could see Florida beating them, right? Like it could happen. So the fact
I don't know. I got a lot of faith in Tampa.
Yeah.
I think we do our predictions at one point or whatever. I was thinking about it. I think I might pick Tampa to repeat right now if I had to pick a team.
That was my pick at the beginning of the season. I said they'd do it because I just didn't think any other team had the depth. And I think they have as good a chance as any team has had in the last little while at repeating, especially if they get both Stamkos and Kucherov back for the playoffs. Then I think that, yeah, okay, they've got a really good shot, but there's something about winning the Stanley Cup that really kind of seems to take the wind out of your sails in terms of like that desperation and want to win again. And it's fascinating, right? Because you think like, okay, we figured it out, we're gonna do it again, but it's like year after year that it's the hardest trophy to win in sports. So
yeah, not impossible. Pittsburgh did it only a few years ago as back-to-back, and I think the biggest X factor for Tampa is actually Vasilevsky because he's just insane. He's having
an insane year.
Yeah, he's the best goalie in the league by far. Maybe not by far because Fleury's had kind of an amazing year.
Yeah.
Onto your Vegas jersey you got on.
Yeah, so I was gonna bring up Vegas because they just won 10 games in a row. And the insane thing about that is that Detroit, who's an Original Six team, has never won 10 games in a row. And here's Vegas, who's, 3 years or 4 years, I can't even remember now when they came into the league, into their existence. And not only have they never made the playoffs, now they've done something that Detroit has never done. So I just thought that was interesting. Not a Vegas fan at all. I will openly admit that. I think my opinion on them is kind of biased, but they're a very interesting team. Like that, I watched a bit of the game last night between them and Colorado because, again, that's another matchup that I think everyone is expecting to happen. And if it doesn't happen this year, people are going to be pissed because that's what they wanted last year and they didn't get it because Dallas ended up knocking off Vegas, right?
Right.
Colorado and then Vegas. But like Fleury has had a crazy year and Vasilevsky's had a very good year. And I will say that I think in both cases, the defensive system that they play behind is pretty good. And I also turned on for like 2 seconds a bit of the Battle of Alberta last night. And in the 2 seconds that I listened to, the guys on there were trying to make an argument for Mike Smith for winning the Vezina. And I just thought to myself, okay, come on now. But then today I was listening to a bit of a podcast and the person they brought up was Jack Campbell. And I'm like, okay, like Jack Campbell's played good, but he's also had a couple really rough games and he's only played like 20 games or something.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think the Vezina, all this is to say is it comes down between Fleury and Vasilevsky for me, and whoever they give it to out of those two for this year, I think is deserving. I don't know who the third is that they nominate, but
Grubero's numbers I think are pretty good. He might get a nod.
He might, but he's also missed a bunch of time now too. And again, that Colorado team, like I know that there's a whole big relationship between goalies and the level of like the team that they play on, their success, obviously. He might get a nod. Whoever the third goalie is who gets the nod, I feel like I'm going to think that they just don't deserve it. So
what if it's Shesterkin?
Shesterkin has been good, but I don't know if he's been Vezina level. But it's been a weird year for goalies. Like I said, when I was picking like fantasy goalies. Like, I think it's been the hardest year to predict goalie success out of any year.
I think so too.
But anyway,
What's your next note?
my next note. So this one you're gonna like too. So Quinton Byfield, he made his NHL debut for the Kings this week, and he played 17 minutes and had 4 shots on net. And I didn't watch the game, but evidently he looked pretty good. And the reason why I bring this up is because the agreement between the NHL and the CHL is up this year. And what that agreement is that if your player plays in the CHL and you don't make the NHL, you have to report back to your CHL team as an overager. And what this year I think has taught us in terms of player development more than anything is that those kind of big prospects that have been allowed to play in the AHL come up and they look way more ready to play NHL hockey. And so I'm really curious what they do, because like European players, for example, don't have that agreement, right? Like when Pedersen came over, if he hadn't made the NHL, he could have played for Utica, for example. But there's been a few players, and I think Byfield's like the biggest name that has done that. And obviously it's one game, so you don't want to put too much pressure on it. But I kind of, the other point I was trying to make here was with LA, I think they've done a very masterful job of bringing their prospects along really slow. But again, it might be that they're not ready, like, for the league, but they have like Turcotte and Velarde and, you know, Byfield, and there's another Russian sounding dude. I know he's American.
Kaliev,
there we go. Like all these guys that they could have just said, okay, here's roster spots, we're giving them to you. And they've kind of put them down in the AHL and they've brought them up slow. And I think that's going to do really good things for that team, but we'll see. So, yeah.
Okay. The next points that I got is on points, and it's kind of like similar to the team standings and rating them on surprises and disappointments, but it's not. It's more individual players.
Sure.
So I broke it down into forward, defense, and rookies for like positive surprises of the year, in my opinion.
Yep.
And then for disappointments, I just had like a big list.
Okay.
So I'll just do the surprises first. And the first one, they're not like, it's hard to describe. It's not real like big surprises, I guess. But like, for example, for number one, I had on the forwards Crosby. The fact that he's 9th in scoring with 56 points in 50 games. Like, I know he's Sidney Crosby, but like he's getting old, and I think this is just another year where everyone was like, yeah, is he going to be able to keep doing his thing? And I don't know that I would have thought he was going to finish top 10 in scoring, and he might not, but to be right up there on a team that people thought were going to be declining is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I'll give you my thought on him at the beginning of the season, because I had it kind of in my like fantasy rankings of where I would take players. I think I was like, I won't take Crosby unless he's available with, I think it was either my 3rd or 4th pick. So I just thought that it was going to be one of those years where he just declined, and then he goes off. So
yeah. I was very surprised. And then the next two on forwards are both from Dallas, which is funny because you talk about how they have a hard time scoring, but number two, I had Pavelski at 31st in the league with 44 points in 50 games, which I don't like. I had him in my pool with his first year on Dallas last year, and it was not good. But then Pavelski, something changed in the bubble for him, and he's had a really, really good year for them. And then the second one on Dallas is Rupe Hintz, who's 47th, but he is actually more than a point per game player with 38 in 37 games. And him and Jason Robertson have kind of established themselves as like the new wave in Dallas, and now, you know, Ben and Sagan seem to be the veteran
aging.
Yeah.
What I'll say about Pavelski is I think San Jose, like their biggest mistake was like it's combined, right? Giving Carlson all that money, but then that basically forced them to let Pavelski walk. And I think Pavelski was so much a part of that like heart and soul of that locker room that on its own was a big loss. But also Pavelski has proved he can still put up numbers. And again, I don't think anyone was expecting that from him this year. And Rupe Hintz also is a player, like he burst onto the scene like 2 years ago in the playoffs. He looked really good, and then I thought last year he was not as good. But this year he has some offensive skill. Like, again, it's weird because Dallas and they do have trouble scoring goals, but I think that those two players have rejuvenated their whole system. And again, you just look at kind of those. I don't know when Jason Robertson was picked. Was he a first rounder? He might have been.
I couldn't tell you.
But I know Rupe Hintz wasn't. But you just look at when you can bring players into your system that aren't, those first round picks or whatever, and makes a big difference.
It sounds like Jim Nill knows what he's doing.
Yeah. I'm gonna double check that now. Rupe Hintz. Second round.
Okay. For the defense, it was easier, I thought, to pick the surprises of the year, and number one was at the top, tippy top there, with Adam Fox being first in defense scoring with 47 points in 50 games.
Yeah.
I think it was expected he was supposed to be a much better defense this year, but I don't think anyone would have picked him to be tops in the league like that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that it definitely helps playing with Panarin in New York, but he's been like great for them, right? You can't say enough, and all the hype, about Makar and Hughes, and then he kind of comes out of those two and says, "Hey, I'm a pretty good offensive defenseman as well."
Yeah. The next one was Mackenzie Weegar in Florida, 14th in defensive scoring with 32 points. Again, I don't think he was on many people's radar. I knew that there was speculation they might want to trade him because they couldn't afford to re-sign him and he hadn't really had a breakout year yet. But yeah. I guess someone knew it was coming. And then the last one, way down the list, but someone that I kind of kept an eye on as a prospect when he played for Team Canada in the World Juniors was Ty Smith, and he made the New Jersey roster finally this year, and he's a half a point a game at 23 points and 46, which is not bad for first year on a team like New Jersey.
Yeah, and Ty Smith is one of those guys, like within the first month or something, you heard a ton about him, and then I haven't really heard much about him since. But I knew he had a pretty good start to the year, and it's good to see them getting some defensive prospects into that system too. So we'll see what he can do.
And for rookies, I didn't do it as 1, 2, 3 because they were all going to be on New Jersey, so I just did a 1 and just saying that like Sharangovich, Walkinen, and Smith are all rookies that are doing quite well in terms of like rookie scoring at least, and it's good for them to have some prospects finally shoring up their team a little bit, even though they're not the ones that they've been getting at the top end of the draft.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that like in terms of New Jersey, they're going to be an interesting team to watch next year. Again, partially because of the division thing. Like this year, they were just in an awful division for them specifically, but Blackwood is a pretty good goalie, and once you have that goalie that's that level, things are easier. And I think Jack Hughes has been better this year. Definitely he's been more noticeable around the puck, and I get the feeling with him that he still has it. Like I don't think he's a bust for a number 1 overall pick. I think that he's probably not going to quite, I don't think he's going to be, the hype around him was too high. I will say that. But I think next year he breaks out. It's just a gut feeling.
We will see. We will see.
The only other forward I was going to throw at you that's not a rookie, but Evander Kane has 20 goals this year, which I think is ridiculous for San Jose. And like, I did not expect that out of him, especially considering all his legal problems. So he's had a pretty good year.
Yeah, no, I didn't think he was going to have the year. Like you say, the legal problems I thought was going to be a distraction, if anything, but no, he's been surprising. Do you have anything more, or should I hop into the
Hop
disappointment?
onto your rookies or your disappointments. Sorry.
Okay, I'll try and rip through them because I did end up having a pretty big list. And again, it's more of disappointment versus expectation, I think.
Yeah.
And might be my expectation. So we'll
Okay.
see what you think. But the top of the list, I had Lafreniere or Lafreniere.
Yeah.
I think being on that Rangers team, I think people probably thought he was going to do a lot better, being first overall pick.
Yeah, he has been better of late, but he definitely took a long time to like even be noticeable with the puck. And yeah, it's obviously a disappointment. I think the comparisons with him and Crosby were there just because of his junior team.
Yeah.
But also what he did at the World Juniors, not this year, but the year before, like was pretty convincing how dominant he was. And then
Yeah.
I mean, he also didn't play hockey for a long time before making his NHL debut, and I don't think that helped him, but he has been disappointing for sure.
I think it feels nice for Ottawa to have Tim Stützle playing as well as he's been playing.
Yes, I agree.
Next one on my list was Carter Hart / all Flyers not named Provorov.
Yeah, Hart had like, I think the second worst goals against average or something. He has some horrible stat, and they're talking about it because he's obviously out for the season now. And I think for me, that's the most surprising player, to be honest, because he was so good last year. And I know like there's the whole thing about goalies that the first couple years they might be really good because shooters don't have a book on them or whatever. But I really felt, and I still feel like he's going to be a good goalie. I don't think he's what he's been this year, but for me, I think he's the most disappointing player I would come up with.
And I have that high on the list then.
Yeah.
Next one down, and from here it doesn't like those were my top two, I think.
Yeah.
But from here it kind of goes in not in any particular order.
Okay.
So next I had Brent Burns / Erik Karlsson. It's more about Burns, I think. I think Erik Karlsson's decline has been noticeable and predictable, but I don't think Burns' year, the year he's having, was as predictable.
Yeah.
Been disappointing for him. And then a similar one next down on the list was Svechnikov and Teravainen in Carolina. I know Carolina's doing really well, and Svechnikov, I think I had him picked as one of my two breakout players of the year last year with JT Miller.
Yeah.
He is doing okay, but he's at like 32 points or whatever, where I think it was expected he was really going to take off. And Teravainen is at like 16 points or something. Like he's really fallen off this year.
Yeah, I know he's hurt now. I don't know how long he's been hurt for. But yeah, it's surprising with the success they've had, but they've just had other players been able to step up, like that Marty Nikas kid or Niches or however you say his name has been so good for them. And I mean, even Jordan Staal is having a pretty good year offensively for him. So it hasn't been as big a problem as it could have been. But yeah, I don't think he was one of those guys that I thought this year would take the kind of the next step, to be honest. But he seems to have taken a bit of a step back.
The other one, next one for me was Pietrangelo in Vegas.
Yeah.
I mean, I know he was injured a little bit here and there at the beginning. I'm not sure what it's been like lately, but he got paid a lot of money to go there. And like Shea Theodore is at the top of like fourth, I think, in points for defense. And Pietrangelo is way, way down there. And I haven't really heard much about him this season at all, to be honest.
I think defensively he's been very good for Vegas. And again, that's kind of why for me with Fleury, I have a bit of a hang up with people talking about his numbers because the defense in front of him is probably, it's got to be up there with one of the best in the league. I think offensively, Pietrangelo's taken a step back, but it's kind of okay because Theodore's there.
Right.
I wouldn't say it was disappointing for me, but his role has definitely changed.
Okay.
But I do think, I'm going to throw this out there, I think Torrey Krug in St. Louis, like, offensively, he's fine, but a big reason why I think they struggled specifically at the beginning of the year was he's not the defensive player that Pietrangelo is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Haven't watched a lot of St. Louis this year, to be honest. Next, I had both Laine and Dubois paired together for obvious reasons on the list, but I think looking at their point totals now compared to expectations, they're both at 21 points. I think when they both got to their new teams, Dubois for sure, not right away, and same with Laine, not right away, but they had a little streak where it seemed like they were going to fit in and do good things, and then it didn't really sustain.
Yeah, I think like Columbus with Laine was predictable, right? Like we all thought like, okay, maybe there was a part of me that's like, maybe he goes there and he just goes off. But there was a big part of me that was like, that's not going to be a good fit. Like it just doesn't make sense. Specifically, again, Tortorella, Laine doesn't seem to work out in my head. Dubois is more surprising for me because I did think that he was going to get, and he has got, a way bigger opportunities playing with better players. And he looked really good at times, and then he looks kind of disinterested again now. And I know I saw one tweet that made me laugh that was like, could both like Winnipeg and Columbus have lost like this trade? And it's possible, but I don't know. Let's see what happens again. I think the Laine contract will determine who wins or loses that deal.
Agreed. Next, going back to your Vegas, Riley Smith was the next disappointment on the list because he used to be nearly point a game player there, and he's fallen way down.
Yeah, and I wonder with Riley Smith how much of that, again, like we've talked about this before, like that identity of being like the misfits and the players they didn't want, and then they've brought in this kind of upper echelon of players like your Pacioretty's and your Stones and your Pietrangelos, and that pushes those guys further down the lineup. And like Carlson's having an okay year, Marchessault's being pretty good lately, but they're definitely not the same that they were. And I mean, I don't think anyone expected like Carlson to score 40 goals or whatever in that first year, but like Riley Smith is another one of those guys, right, that he was given a bigger role and he's had it taken away, and I just don't think he's not going to be the same player, right? But he's okay. I don't know.
Final two I had, and the first of the two is I said the Hughes brothers, and again this is more preseason expectation versus where they are now.
Yeah, so Quinn Hughes, I think, has had, I would say, a roller coaster of a season. And you could almost, like, if you could graph it out, this is how my brain works. You could have his offensive skill and his defensive skill. And at the beginning of the season, you know, his offense was up here and his defense was like down here. And then it like kind of met in the middle for a little bit. And then now I feel like both have gone down. And I feel bad saying this because I still think he's going to be a good player. And I kind of think that next year people are going to underrate him, specifically his defensive skill. And I think he's going to get a lot better. But this year's not been good for him.
Yeah, it's drawing a lot of Gostisbehere comparisons for sure.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a better defensive player than Gostisbehere. I still have faith. I think his hockey IQ is just too good to be this bad.
Yeah, I agree.
He's going to learn from this year for sure. So,
and then the final one I had is I think the expectations weren't super high, but the fact that Matt Duchene has like 11 points is pretty disappointing.
Yeah, you see, for me, Duchene, like, I just think that's one of the worst contracts in hockey. Like, I know everyone talks about Jeff Skinner, and like, I don't know. I don't know what Nashville really saw in him. I think since he was in Colorado, really, he hasn't been the same player. He had glimpses in Ottawa, glimpses for, I guess, in Columbus when he was there for a little bit in that playoff run. He looked pretty good, but I don't think he's been good in Nashville. And yeah, maybe it's a little bit lower than I expected, but I'm not totally like surprised by his year.
Yep, fair enough.
Yeah, that's all your.
So that's the end of anything I had.
Yeah, I just have one. Well, no, one little quick thing, which is what we were talking about this morning, which is that Kovalchuk, he's evidently told his KHL team that he doesn't want to sign another contract. He wants to pursue going back to the NHL, which is obviously interesting because last summer we had that he wasn't signing in the NHL and he was going back to the KHL. So I'm suspecting it was probably all to do with money, which makes a lot of sense. And when he realized he wasn't going to get, more than league minimum here last year, he decided to go back home and play in Russia. And now he wants to give it one more shot in the NHL.
Did he have a good year?
Well, they won the KHL Cup or the Gargarian Cup or whatever it's called. I don't know personally how he did, but like I just got a notification for a Canucks game, but I'm pretty sure it's tomorrow. Anyway, I said to you, like, I think if Montreal could make it work money-wise, I could see him ending up back in Montreal because he fit in so well there before, and, like, he seemed to like the city, and the city seemed to like him. However, now they have a bunch of better options, right? Like, Toffoli comes to mind straight away, but also, like, they have Caulfield up there now. They have Anderson. They have a bunch of wingers. The kind of interesting one I'm going to see with Montreal is the whole Phil Deneau thing, because so this is like a total tangent now, but he is an unrestricted free agent, and Montreal offered him a contract and he rejected it. He didn't like the money, and he hasn't had a very good season, but defensively he's like one of the best centers in the league. And if you pull the players on who their hardest player is to play against, most of them say Phil Deneau, or like that's the one who gets the most votes. And so I think it's going to be really interesting if he leaves Montreal and what sort of contract he gets, because he seems primed to be the type of player that you overpay for, but maybe he brings your team success. So
Right.
I think it'll be interesting to watch him. But anyway, if Kovalchuk can find a team that kind of like Montreal, that like what they were, who needs some help up front.
I'll throw out two to you. I can see him, and they're his old teams. I can see him wanting to rejoin either New Jersey,
Yes,
as like a veteran winger with a team, a bunch of young talent, or LA for the same reason.
okay, what about Winnipeg?
No.
I think that would be so cool, but that's just me because I like the story.
I can't see it.
He's still their like in that franchise of Winnipeg, he's their leading scorer, which is hilarious.
Right. I think for the hilarity it'd be nice, but for logistics, yeah, I think you'd probably want to sign with a team that he's familiar with and has like, a spot for him. I don't think he'd be able to make it onto like a Boston, because I don't think he'd make the roster.
No. Yeah, the thing with LA I wonder about, I guess, is how long they hold those roster spots for their young guys.
Right.
You'd think that next year they're going to want to kind of rejuvenate that forward group specifically. Like, they got rid of Carter now. Like, they're kind of getting rid of their old boys, and it's going to be a new team. So maybe for some veteran leadership, you bring in a guy like Kovalchuk, but he didn't work out particularly well in LA. I mean, I think the most Rangers move of all time would be to have him end up in New York, right?
Yeah, I can see that too.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's all I have. I might have one other quick little thing. I just had that Jacob Vrana goal was insane.
Oh, I missed it. I'll have to look.
It's really insane, and he looks really good in Detroit. Again, Mantha looks pretty good in Washington, but I think Vrana for Mantha probably would have been a good deal on its own, and then like Washington had to pay a bunch to get rid of what's his nuts, but Richard Panik. But it looks like a big overpayment for Washington so far, but we'll see.
Yeah, I still like Mantha in Washington, so we'll see.
I like Mantha as a player. I think he's decent, but
Mhm.
yeah. Anyway, that's all I got.
Alrighty, so we'll do it again next week. We're camping on Friday, so it might be a short week for us, or it might be a long week for us, but we'll guaranteed have stuff to talk about as we're coming to the end of the season. I was thinking next episode we can bring out our lists from the beginning of the year and just kind of see where the rankings are for the standings, how
wrong I got it. I'll be
glorious we did. And then I think maybe not next episode, but we can start talking about doing a little predictor for the expansion draft that we can try and rip through.
Yeah, that will be good. I've started to think about it for the Canucks, obviously, but yeah, it'll be fun. And then yeah.
Okay, so news and stuff next week, and we will also look back at our predictions for the standings, and maybe we'll talk about our predictions for the trophies too, or something like that.
Sounds good.
Okay, well, it's been episode 30, Big 30, Hockey Talk on the Rock from Salt Spring Island. That's Laura. I'm Keith. We'll do it all again sometime soon in the future. Thanks for listening, people.